Dear friends, good evening and thank you for joining us once again to our cycle of lectures in our first chamber series. And tonight we continue with our seminar on transcendental sexuality. The topic is the science of alchemy. And this is a very deep and profound topic. So we would ask of you that because we're going to get exposed to new nomenclature, new ways of expressing things and alchemy and alchemical terms, that you open yourself to that which is new. Give yourself an opportunity to learn of this this new terminology, because as you do so, you not only expand your intellectual culture, you empower yourself to recognize new symbols and decipher their meanings. When you do that, as you come across these symbols in your sleep, as you are out in that astral experience, then you become so much more capable as well of understanding the secrets and the teachings that you may be receiving. So, in the topic of the science of alchemy, before we have a conversation about what is materia prima, which is our raw material, let's clarify what is this thing called alchemy. Because in the Middle Ages, there were many quote-unquote scientists who practiced alchemy, and they consistently sought the opportunity to transform lead into gold. And as people walked and broke into these homes, they were considered, of course, heretics. They were considered against the religious principles of the time. As they were broken into their homes, it was very common to find a furnace, to find a forge, to find containers with liquids, to find that many of them were manufacturing things like soap. There were certainly many practitioners who were seeking to understand the behavior of nature in its compositions and its interactions. And thus, that is why alchemy is today the founding principle behind modern day chemistry. But the true alchemists, they had many of these arrangements in their homes as a symbol. Number one, they had them for protection in case somebody came looking, but they also had them as a symbol, because the word alchemy comes from two distinct root words, one that is Arabic in nature and the other one that is Greek. The first one is al, and al in Arabic means God, and chemia, which is a Greek root word, it's the science of the metals. So what we see here is the science of the metals of God. Because when we are speaking about metals, we are speaking about something that is an undecomposable material. So we need you to think in terms of the science of the metals of God. In reality, the science of the undecomposable materials of God. That is what alchemy is. And in reality, all of these alchemists, when they spoke about turning lead into gold, they were speaking about transforming the lead of the personality into the gold of the spirit. So observe the image that we are providing for you on the screen. The first thing that it says is materia prima lapidis philosophorum. Materia prima stands for raw material. Lapidis is stone, and philosophorum is philosopher's stone. Those of you who may have seen the movies of Harry Potter, you would see that even today, there is an effort to bring some of this wisdom to the general mass of people. And we see that in those very last movies, Harry Potter is the custodian of Nicholas Flamel's stone, which is the stone of the philosophers, the philosopher's stone. It is known in that movie as the stone of resurrection. And that stone in the movie itself gives him the power to come back to life after he offers himself in a sacrifice. So there is something interesting about this philosopher's stone. But in all of these alchemical drawings and art, notice that we will always see that there is a symbol of a man and a woman. Over the man, we will always see that there is the sun. And over the head of the woman, we will always see that there is a moon. We will see that they are standing next to a forge, and that from the smoke that is rising out of that forge, we can see that there is a black bird. That black bird is a raven. And it is a raven, it is a crow, it is one of those birds that will nourish itself with carcasses. That bird is a symbol of death. It is a symbol of the planet Saturn, and it is there because it reminds us of the mystical death that we must endure, which is the elimination of the ego. But notice that as you continue climbing up, you will see that there is a writing. There is a writing on that band that is encompassing a series of flowers. And that writing starts with the word chelum, which means heavens. Within and past of that band, we can see that there are flowers, and those flowers are a symbol of the attributes and the faculties of the innermost. And we also see that there is a symbol of a planet. That is the symbol of a planet, Neptune. It is very characteristic because it has a trident. And that trident is a symbol of the forces of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And all of that is crowned. That crown is the crown of the tree of life. That is our real being, Keter. Beyond that, we see that there is an unmanifested light. There is a sun. That is the absolute. And next to the absolute, it says materia prima, lapidis philosophorum. So for all purposes, what this image is showing us, that when man and woman come and they work together, as they hold on to that staff, which is a staff of wisdom, it is a symbol of the spine of each one of them. When they work together in the mystical death, in the elimination of their psychological aggregates, they have the opportunity to have within reach all of the faculties, attributes, and powers of the being, and they can reach the heights of the tree of life, which is where our real being resides. And the key to reach that level is in the stone of the philosophers. Now allow us to tell you that that philosopher's stone is our superior ethereal body. As we come together and work in the magic of love, and we transmute of our creative powers, as we saturate the physical body with that transmuted energy, what will happen is that the ethereal body will turn itself into that very same stone of the philosophers. And in that stone, we can see the foundation of our work. This is the lapidis philosophorum. And the raw material that we need is indeed the mercury. The alchemists referred to it as mercury, and mercury is a liquid metal. Every one of us who has seen Mercury, we know for a fact that it is a silver-like liquid metal at room temperature. Perhaps those of us who are a little older, we would remember that when we used to get sick when we were children, thermometers were not digital back then. They were not computer-like. They were just a glass rod with a bulb filled with mercury. And when those thermometers fell on the ground and they shattered, then we played by taking those little droplets of mercury and just bumping them together because they will all coalesce. Maybe you remember that. But of course, mercury is toxic. And for all purposes, we make a conscientious effort now just to keep it away because it will affect our central nervous system. But nevertheless, the alchemists recognized that within us there was a liquid metal. And again, when we are speaking of a liquid metal, what we are saying is an undecomposable material that exists in us. And that undecomposable material is our creative waters. The sperm, as it exists within us, is the raw mercury. And we need to take this creative water that exists within our own physical body, and we need to transmute that raw mercury. Because the moment that we transmute it, as we referred to you in that image, you will see that there is a man who is moving that blowing element so that the forge can activate all of its fire. And out of the forge, we see that there is a steam coming out. Notice that there is a sun and a moon in the background. It is the work of the man and the woman. So as that man is working with that forge and we see that smoke rising, that smoke is a symbol of the transmuted raw mercury. That smoke that is climbing up to the heavens is the metallic soul of the mercury. And we need you to know this because Samael speaks about the metallic soul of the mercury in many of his works. But now that we know that our creative waters are the raw mercury and that we need to transmute it, we need to know that there are 3 types of mercury as we perform this work. Because when we start with it, we are dealing with the raw mercury. This is the sacred water that exists within our creative organs. And this is what is known as the exiohehari. When we transmute that raw mercury, what we see is that what rises, that vapor, that cloud, that steam that rises, is the metallic soul of the mercury. It results from the transmutation of our sexual libido. That metallic soul of the mercury, that transmutation happens every time that we refrain from giving ourselves into our inferior aspects. So if at some point you feel that you are getting angry, at that moment, before you give in into the anger and you become something completely different, observe how you are being affected at the level of your thinking, at the level of your emotions, and even at the level of your habits. Notice that your thoughts will become very inferior and aggressive. Notice that your emotions will become very inferior and completely uncaring, unkind, and uncompassionate. And observe that in your habits, sometimes when we get angry, we clench our fists. Sometimes we stand and we feel like we want to run away. Notice how all this happens. Because the moment that you observe that and you refrain yourself from reacting like that, you are effectively stealing the fire from your own ego. What you are doing there is that you are stealing the fire from your internal Lucifer. And as you refrain, that fire becomes available to you. your raw mercury becomes transmuted into the metallic soul of the mercury, and you start making energy available for your internal work. This transmuted mercury, this metallic soul, is the energy that rises up to the brain. And then there's the third type of mercury. Because as we continue transmuting our creative energies, as this metallic soul of the mercury is rising up our spine into the brain through those two serpents, Ida and Pingala, what happens is that the flow of those solar and lunar atoms, they generate a force of induction at the base of the spine. And when that happens, that force of induction triggers spark of the fire of Kundalini. And when Kundalini awakens, Kundalini becomes that sacred fire of the Holy Spirit. That fire is known in alchemy as the sulfur. So when that sulfur is active, the mercury, that metallic soul of the mercury that is rising, it becomes fecundated by the sulfur itself. That sacred fire, it blends with the metallic soul of the mercury. That mixture slowly rises up the spine and into the brain. But it does not flow mechanically. It is not a flow as you will see a flow in the kitchen when you are boiling water, that you start generating steam and the steam gets all the way up to the ceiling. Not like that, because each one of our vertebrae is closed, and there are 33 of them. So that means that the necessary merits of the heart need to be present so that the angels of the department of the cedar trees can open those doors and allow that fecundated fire to penetrate into that chamber. When that fire enters into each one of the vertebrae, every discrete vertebrae will allow for the awakening of special degrees, of special faculties, special abilities, special powers, all in different degrees. And as it reaches the brain, the superior centers of the brain awaken. Those superior centers of the brain are the superior intellectual and the superior emotional. They exist within that cavity of the brain, that cavity of the cranium where the brain is. Now, once all that transmuted, fecundated mercury reaches the brain, it eventually makes its way into the temple of the heart. So if you have ever seen the staff of a shepherd, you know that it rises and you know that it curves at the top and it comes back down. That staff of the shepherds is the very same symbol of our spine and the path that the sacred fire travels from the base of our spine into the brain and into the heart. After we are done with that, the excess of all of that transmuted energy, it enables the crystallization of the superior existential bodies of the being. So we saturate the needs of the physical body. We saturate the needs of the ethereal body, and then we have the philosopher's stone. And the exceedant of that goes up one octave into the astral plane. And we start condensing the astral body. And then another octave into the mental plane, and then we crystallize the mental body. And then one more into the causal plane, and we crystallize the causal body. And beyond that, the body of the illuminated soul, and then the body of the innermost. And just like that, we continue creating and developing the 7 superior existential bodies of the being. Physical, astral, mental, and causal bodies. All these 4 bodies are made of mercury that has been fecundated by the sulfur, each one in its own octave. So we start working with Do, we go into Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, See, my friends, these four bodies, when they become impregnated with the anemic and spiritual principles of the being, it is that combination what turns us into an authentic man. So every time that you have seen that nomenclature coined the quote-unquote Son of Man, the Son of Man is he who has been able to develop their four bodies, physical, astral, mental, and causal, and who has had those four bodies impregnated with the anemic and spiritual principles of the being. So now you know. Every time that you see in the sacred scriptures, every time that you hear a pastor or a priest speak about the Son of Man, now you know what is indeed the true meaning behind that. Now notice how in this particular work, what we are seeing is the man and the woman united. United to such a degree that they become one. They are a single androgen. They are sharing a crown because the two of them together are one divine being that is a king and queen of nature. Notice that they have the wings of bats. That reminds us immediately of the great Maya master Kamasot, the bat god. That means that they have developed power over life and death. And notice how the woman is holding on to the serpent with her left hand. And that serpent is also wearing a little crown. There are 3 protrusions coming up in the head of that serpent. There is a halo of light around it. That is an indication that the woman is the one who can give us not only the wisdom, but she is the one that for man holds the key to salvation. The man on the right hand is holding a chalice. The chalice is a symbol of a flower. The bottom of the chalice are the roots, the stem, and of course the cup is the actual blossom flower itself, symbol of the attributes of the being. But that chalice is also the feminine yoni. He is holding it in reverence. And we see that there are 3 serpents in that particular chalice. Those 3 serpents are the 3 forces: the masculine, the feminine, and the neutral. Man, woman, and the love that unites them. But those 3 are also the 3 gunas: rajas, sattva, and tamas. One of them who brings the fire of creation. The second one, sattva, that brings the sustenance of creation. And tamas, that brings inertia. It brings the forces that end the cycles of creation as well. So you can see here within this very beautiful drawing how many symbols we can find. And at the level of the heart of this being, what we find is the symbol of Mercury, which is a symbol of supreme, superior wisdom. Very well. So when a man has his 4 bodies, and those bodies are impregnated with the anemic principles, faculties of the being, that man becomes a son of man. He becomes a king of nature. But for this, it is necessary that our Mercury becomes fecundated by the sulfur. Dear friends, the moment that our fire of Kundalini awakens and our transmuted Mercury becomes fecundated, that is known as the Arche. And the Arche is the source of the existential bodies of the being. Those superior astral, mental, causal, Buddhic, atmic bodies, they are all made of Arche. And Arche is also the source substance of all of the worlds themselves. Because Arche is a mixture of Mercury, which is the creative water, the sulfur, which is the creative fire, and salt, And salt is the spirit. This is what Samael tells us. So notice once again how that man and that woman are working, distilling the gross aspects of their personality, those creative waters that are black in the beginning, as that substance, that metallic soul of the mercury rises, it rises through two channels that entwine themselves in the spine, and they come to deposit themselves up at the very top, which is the brain. Notice how the woman, with her right hand, she holds the key to allow that distillate or those bottoms to flow out of that particular spine. That means that she holds the power to be able to drain from that distillation column those bottoms, because everything that accumulates at the bottom, it tends to be treated as waste. So she holds the power to help us get rid of our internal waste, of our internal inferior aspects, which are our very own psychological aggregates. Now, once those superior bodies are created, the work is not done. The fact that the bodies are there, that is just part of the work itself. The moment those bodies are created, they need to be perfected. And perfected means covered in gold. But gold, this has also some deeper meaning. Because when we spoke of metal, we know that these metals are uncorruptible. But when we're speaking about gold, it is speaking about gold in terms of the thing that shines. They must become radiant with light. These bodies are made of mercury, and they must become radiant. That means that they must become perfect. They must become bodies of gold. And when we have the superior solar bodies, physical, astral, mental, and causal, and we continue working, bringing those bodies to perfection, and those bodies become radiant, meaning they become impregnated with that gold, those four bodies of gold are known as the tosoma heliacon. Tosoma is the body. Heliacon comes from Helios, the sun. So those are the solar bodies. Once they are covered in gold, they are then covered again by the different parts of the being. Remember that the being is made of many parts. There are 49 principal parts of the being. We have the 24 elders of the constellations of the zodiac. We have the 12 apostles. We have the 4 devas of nature. We have our internal goddess Minerva. We have our internal police of karma, the Kaon. We have Morpheus, that's our god of dreams. We have our maiden of memories. So you see, there are many distinct aspects of the being. So once these bodies are covered in gold, they are covered again by the different parts of the being, and altogether, they become like a wedding dress made of gold and full of precious stones. Once we have that, those bodies become the garment or the wedding garment for our intimate Christ. It is then that the Christ rises and it works through our senses in favor of humanity. But friends, as you have seen, that magnificent cosmic force that is the cosmic Christ, it needs of a splendid vehicle to be able to manifest itself. Just like we, in our current condition, need of these vehicles to manifest ourselves. It is just that according to the principle of correspondence, at our level, we need of these bodies, the cosmic Christ that happens to be that creative force out of which everything is infused in the universe. Well, it needs of certain bodies that are just of a more superior nature. And all of this work starts with the work of the stone of the philosophers. But we have a big limiter. We all know that we have a huge challenge ahead of us to be able to create the superior existential bodies. And that limiter is the ego. This is why when we learn of these sexual mysteries, we are guided to work with that transmuted electric force and the intervention of our Divine Mother so that we can effectively turn the ego into cosmic dust. It is by eliminating that ego that we can overcome that effect of the original sin that resulted in us being expelled from paradise. It is through the work of the elimination of the ego that then our internal Adam and Eve, meaning our creative organs and our brain, Adam symbolizes the brain, Eve symbolizes our creative organs. It is how we can then take these two as primordial instruments and bring them back into the Garden of Eden. It is through the elimination of the ego that we can finally rid ourselves of all of our illnesses, of all of the inconveniences that we see around in life, day in and day out. Because we can reach once again the union with our individual and particular Glorion. We have to eliminate this ego, and that ego is dry Mercury. We don't want dry Mercury. We want to deal with the metallic soul of the Mercury itself. So every time that we have been identifying ourselves with the circumstances of life, with the impressions that come around us, every identification leads to a fascination. That fascination takes us into a deeper state of sleep of consciousness. And when that happens, the Mercury dries itself up. So imagine, when you are cooking, what is left behind at the very bottom of your pot, at that point where the heat is making direct contact with whatever you're cooking, all of that black crust that stays behind, that is a good allegory so that we can visualize this dry Mercury. And when we, instead of working to transmute our creative energy so that we can see the awakening of the sacred fire, when we go with the desires and the ambitions of the ego, we start polarizing that creative fire negatively. And when that happens, that sulfur becomes arsenicated. And thus it is known as arsenicated sulfur. It is called arsenicated because arsenic is a very dangerous poison. And just like the consequences of our defects, it harms us. It brings misery and it brings suffering. But when we eliminate from ourselves the dry Mercury, and when we eliminate from ourselves the arsenicated sulfur, which are all those bestial carnal fires of passion, like when you are very angry, or like when you are suffering because you think that people don't like you, or like when you are just investing of your energies, mental and emotional, because of things that you want to buy and things that you need when in reality you don't. All that is part of that Kunda buffer organ. The Kunda buffer organ is the very same tail of Satan. It is that red tail with the arrow tip that is pointing downwards into the infernos of man. And you can see the effect of that dry Mercury, that ego, and that arsenicated sulfur in that androgen that you see on the picture. Because what you see here is a fusion of a man and a woman. It is a divine androgen. That means that those masculine and feminine forces, they are in perfect harmony within that being. But nevertheless, that being is bound. And it's bound by that serpent that has two heads. Notice that the head that is looking at them, that is the ego. The head that looks devilish at the very bottom, close to their feet, that is a symbol of the arsenicated sulfur. So what this painting is telling us is that we can make progress, but progress will be limited by the dry mercury and the poison of the arsenic sulfur. So once we work with them, once we continue engaging the power of our Divine Mother, once we go willingly into our own internal infernos, meaning that we start embracing with gratitude and gratefulness all of these difficult circumstances of life without putting resistance and without complaining and without fighting them, as we do that, we can start working with our Divine Mother to eliminate these two. And as they disappear, the antimony will impregnate those superior bodies with the gold of the Spirit. The alchemists referred to that thing that impregnates the bodies with that gold so that it makes them radiant. They referred to it as the antimony because antimony comes from the French antimoine, which is the killer of that which has been isolated. You see? The antimony is the killer of that which has been isolated. As we work with our Divine Mother, and as we eliminate from us the dry mercury and the arsenicated sulfur, the antimony as a part of our being comes and it starts impregnating our bodies with gold. It is that thing what allows our bodies to become purified, to become radiant as solar bodies themselves. And when we have the bodies of pure gold, you receive the sword of gold. At that point, Samael tells us, you are an archangel. And notice how this man and this woman are together in this container. This container is a container of pristine glass. It is perfectly clean. And they are in there looking like a mermaid and a merman because they have the wisdom of the waters. That is the very same wisdom of Neptune. That is the wisdom of the transmutation of our creative energies. And in that container, the container is a symbol of their body, of their superior existential bodies. And that liquid that exists in that container, that is the elixir of long life. Through their wisdom, together, they unite, and it allows for the birth of those flowers that are a symbol of the attributes, virtues, powers, and laws of the being itself. So when we have those bodies of gold, meaning when we have worked with our Divine Mother, when we have eliminated our psychological aggregates, when we have gotten rid of that crust and that waste of the dry mercury that resides within us, those remnants of the ego that has to be scraped off, when we work with the elimination of those bestial passions that exist in us, the arsenicated sulfur, it is that part of the being that is called the antimony, what impregnates our superior vehicles with that radiance that the Christ needs so that he can become our intimate Christ. So, the secret of the great work is on knowing how to fabricate the mercury until you can create the arche. We need to transmute our creative water to liberate the metallic soul of the mercury. And it is the result of that work and the merits of the heart, meaning the sacrifice that we do within ourselves and for humanity, that then Kundalini will awaken and that sulfur will fecundate our transmuted waters. So, again, the secret of the great work is on knowing how to fabricate mercury until you create arche. Now, you would all remember that in the sacrifice of the great master, as the great master Jeshua became crucified, there were 3 nails driven into the master. One in the right hand, one in the left hand, and one in his feet. Those nails were made of iron. And iron by itself means sacred metal. When we get the iron wet, we all know that it will oxidize. We will know that it will become rusty. And if we don't take care of it, eventually moisture, meaning the water, will destroy that metal. The same thing happens to us. We need to be protectant of our own metals. And when it comes to our liquid mercury, there will be 3 calcinations of the mercury. Now, calcinations mean that they will go through fire. Calcination is the thermal-induced decomposition of the metal. That means that is when the metals are exposed to a tremendously intense amount of fire. So we, dear friends, we will go through 3 purifications of both iron and fire. This is why the great master experienced the 3 nails on the cross. Notice that 1 nail is on his feet. We know that that is right there. Work with iron and fire, because we see, of course, the nail and we see the blood, and the blood is a symbol of fire. But it happened at his feet because as part of this work, there has to be right action. We have to live a life of righteousness. It happened in his left hand because this wisdom brings a tremendous amount of voluntary suffering. Like Arcanum 65, which is the Arcanum of Learning, that says in its transcendental axiom, he who brings science brings wisdom, day and night, for his own being. And in that science, what we see is the understanding of the phenomena of nature by virtue of causes and effects. That speaks of us going into our internal infernos to confront all of our insecurities, all of our shortcomings, all of our inferiorities, so we can confront once again all of those things that we would rather not have anybody else see. Because if we don't keep an eye on them, we could become very shameful. And they could destroy us, you see? And in his right hand, which is the hand that gives, we see there iron and fire. Because we have to give kindness. We have to give compassion. We have to give sacrifice for others. Nevertheless, through the 3 calcinations of the mercury, the end result is the resurrection of the Christ within the practitioner. That resurrection is a glorious moment. And those 3 calcinations of the mercury, they happen at the first mountain of initiation, which is the work with the 7 serpents of fire. We see it at the mountain of resurrection, which is the work with the 7 serpents of light. And the third one are the 8 years of the work of Judas. Those are the three mountains. And if you were interested, we would invite you to read the book of Samael, The Three Mountains, where he speaks in detail the challenges and the glorious moments that come with the initiation. So for us to be able to perform this work and achieve resurrection, we must first become a man. We must first become the Son of Man. And we have to do that before we can enter the realm of the Superman. Because not all men are fused with divinity. The biggest problem is that we get into this work and we forget about the dry Mercury, meaning the remnants of the ego. We forget about our arsenicated sulfur, which is our inferior passions, those remnants of the Kunda buffer organ. And as a consequence, we become Hanasmusen. And a Hanasmusen is a being that is both an angel and a demon. These are beings with a double center of gravity. They have a being that is dressed in the garments of the being, but they still have consciousness trapped in the ego. They are both a black and a white magician at the same time. And a good example of this is Andramelech. Samael speaks of Andramelech, and he speaks about times where he invoked Andramelech, and the being that presented was the one dressed in the garments of gold of the being. And other times when he invoked Andramelech, the one that showed up was the dark aspect of it, was the demon Andramelech. So for us to achieve resurrection, we have to keep in mind that this dry Mercury is a big culprit for us. For us to eliminate this dry Mercury, Samael tells us the submerged egos, they rise with terrible, horrifying, and blood-curdling strength, all processed within their own corruption. So we must enter into the realm of Saturn. We need to learn to work with the black fire, and as the egos are destroyed, the Mercury will turn its color from black to white. As we continue the work, the Mercury will become yellow. And once there are no more aggregates, the antimony starts fixing the atoms of gold. And thus we receive a red garment. It is a red vestment, a red cape that is worn by all of the great masters. Friends, these are the colors of alchemy. We see them every year in the celebration of the three kings within the Hispanic culture. Those three wise men who came to visit the Savior the moment that he was born. One was black, one was yellow, one was white, and they were all dressed in red, because that red color is a symbol of high spirituality. It is the same color of that land of red that Quetzalcoatl embarked himself to in that life raft that he made out of serpents. So the colors of alchemy are black, white, yellow, and red. And all of the guidance that we need comes from our individual and particular Divine Mother, from Stella Maris. Samael tells us when the internal being has completed the work, he is born within the heart of man. He must live the cosmic drama within the practitioner, and he assumes charge of all mental, emotional, and willful processes. So this right here is the essence of the Savior who saves us. The essence of the Salvator Salvandus. Because the Christ, being divine and pure, the moment that it incarnates itself in the practitioner, at that time of the Gnostic initiation, it is the Christ, the one that assumes ownership of all mental, emotional, and willful processes. So he assumes ownership of the mental, emotional, and willful processes of a being that still carries the ego. And that is a huge sacrifice that the Christ as a Savior is doing for us. But the fact that Christ is born within the practitioner does not mean that it's going to be there forever. If the initiate makes a mistake, he can lose the intimate Christ. And he can lose the Christ when the metal is melted, when he spills of the hermetic cup. The moment that we waste of our creative waters, the interior madness escapes. That is the fall of the master. The fall of the spiritual soul of a master, the fall of a bodhisattva. And in alchemy, what they used to say is that the initiate tossed the stone into the waters and dissolved it on a Saturday. Dissolved it on a day of Saturn. Friends, we share all this with you so that we can let you know of the works of Samael. Because Samael went through 3 resurrections. All of this work that we are explaining here of going up these 3 mountains of initiation, this is something that Samael has done 3 times. He did it in the prior cosmic day, in the previous Mahamambantara, during the lunar chain before Earth came into existence. You may have already read that Samael was also crucified by the Selenites in what is today the moon. Then, at the time of the 3rd root race, at the time of Lemuria, Samael made the mistake of falling into animal degeneration. After the sexualities were split between man and woman, as men and women started working together, he fell. And when that happened, he was still able to recover, still during the times of Lemuria, and achieve that 2nd resurrection. And then, after Lemuria, in this 5th Aryan race, he was able to do this back in the central plateau of Asia. But actually, at the beginning of this particular human race, at that time of the central plateau of Asia, he took wife at a time that he had been told that it was prohibited. So he fell once again and continued working throughout his different incarnations until he completed his work and abandoned his body in December of 1977. So, for a man to make progress, he must either toss his stone into the waters or intentionally descend, not fall. We need to get our stone, and we need to polish our stone with our creative waters. We need to intentionally descend into our own infernos. And the descent cannot be confused by a fall. We certainly do not want to fall. We want to make the most of the Donum Dei. The Donum Deus is the gift of God. That gift of God is the ability to comprehend the mysteries of the great work. My friends, those people who do not have the Donum Deus, they can study this, but they will not understand. They can get all the books of Samael, and they can read all of this very same information, but they will not be able to make head or tails out of it. Remember, these teachings are not for the intellect. They are specifically for the consciousness. And it is the gift of God what enables the consciousness to receive it. So we would like to end by stating that we must strive to become Christified. To do this, the fight must be to the death against everything and against everyone. Against oneself, against nature, against every resistance until we become triumphant. If we do not do that, what will happen is exactly what you're seeing in that image, where the monster of the earth will eventually devour us, just to satisfy its fundamental and basic economic needs. So friends, we sourced this material today out of Samael's lecture titled Arche, and we are of course very grateful to all these sources for all of these beautiful images that we have been able to capture to put this material together for you tonight. So dear friends, this has been the topic on transcendental sexuality, the science of alchemy. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and may all beings be happy.